So I want to talk a bit about NFTs, and that means discussing blockchains and cryptocurrencies. So in case you don't know how they work, here's the basics. And we're not going to get into the tech here, this is just the concepts. For these purposes, you can imagine the blockchain as a giant monolith in the centre of town. And it's covered in inscriptions that anyone can just go up and read. And you can add your own inscriptions to the monolith by making a blood sacrifice, which I've thrown in to make it spicy, but also to represent the enormous environmental costs that real blockchains have. And once something's on the monolith, it can never be removed. Now the town's got a bank as well, it's got a whole perfectly functional system of money, but that's no good if you want to pay to have someone killed, because a city watch will turn up at the bank the next day and say, "Hey, so someone was assassinated last night, that usually goes for about 1,000 grots, has anyone made any transfers of about that much lately?" And the bank worker says, yeah, Don Murderoni did just last week. And then the watch turn up at Uncle Murderoni's legitimate pizza ranch, and the gig is extremely up. So instead, someone sacrifices a fly to the monolith and inscribes, "There are 50 coins, 28 for me, 3 for the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarf Lords, 9 for mortal men, 1 for the Master, 1 for the Dame, and 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane," or however they want to divvy up the coins. And then next time Murderoni needs someone off, he sacrifices a spider to the monolith and inscribes, "3 of my coins now belong to Hitman 420. And the watch can read the monolith same as anyone, they know what transactions have taken place, but if everyone's using fake names and no one breaks ranks and gives up anyone's pseudonym, there's nothing they can do about it. Now the bank insists this isn't real money, but you can't eat a grot either, and as long as there are people who are willing to exchange goods and services for these things, then it doesn't really matter if you can hold them in your hand or read them on a monolith. All the money's as real as anything else. And in the town is an artist, and the artist does very well selling his paintings to the nobility. And there's a bard. And the bard does okay, doing performances and writing songs on commission, but the bard's problem is that once someone's heard a song a few times, they just know the song, and they can sing it themselves, and there isn't really any need to keep paying the bard. So the bard decides to write a song and sell it to the highest bidder. You will be able to own this song. And the nobleman bids him 1,000 grots for it, so he goes to the monolith, sacrifices his least favourite god, and inscribes, "Lord Gullible owns the song." Everyone can see it up on the monolith, so it must be legit. And if Gullible ever wants to sell the song, all he has to do is kill a horse and inscribe on the monolith a new owner. And that, pretty much exactly, is how NFTs and cryptocurrencies work. Now NFTs have obviously been in the news a lot recently because there's been a bit of a clamour for them. But I think a lot of the discussion around it has been ignoring some interesting and I think important questions. And a lot of this is because if the only tool you have is a blockchain, then everything is going to look like whatever problem blockchains solve. Or more charitably, if you've already accepted that the blockchain is a real and important thing, then you're a lot further along the way to accepting non-fungible tokens on the blockchain as a means of owning digital art. But a lot of the rest of it is because there's really very little motivation for the websites who are selling these things to question too hard whether the people buying them are getting anything of any value. An NFT is a non-fungible token. So something like bitcoins or dollars are fungible because if somebody told you they'd won $1 million, you wouldn't ask them which dollars. But if somebody had bought a painting, a reasonable question might be, which painting? So NFTs work really well for something like a trading card game. You need to keep track of which players own which cards in a way that can't be faked. If you're playing against somebody on email, you need to know that they really own the cards that they're claiming to. And you can do that perfectly well by just having the company that runs the trading card game set up a server and store who owns which cards, which is what we nearly always do. But there's more than one way to skin a cat, and one advantage of a blockchain is that at least in theory, the company who runs the game can't just take your cards off you because they don't control the blockchain. Although I should say that at least one of these games stores its cards on the blockchain but runs the actual game on a centralised server that the company does control. So although they can't take your cards away from you, they could perfectly well nerf all the stats. You can get around that and design a game that's completely open where the company that runs it can't do anything. But why would the company that runs it do that? There's less than no money in it compared to running a 95% classical game and putting just enough blockchain in to make tech bros think it's cool. But say you did. Say you built this perfect theoretical decentralised game. Doesn't mean you can apply the same thinking to digital art and expect it to still work in exactly the same way. Say I mint an NFT of this cute digital drawing I did and sell it to you. That supposedly proves that you own the drawing, but does it? We know the trading card is legit because it says in the rules of the trading card game that the cards are issued as NFTs on this blockchain, signed with this particular key, so if a token has those properties, it must be a real trading card. But there aren't any rules like that for art. How do you know that I did the drawing? How do you know that I minted the token? How do you know I didn't mint hundreds of tokens all for this same drawing and just sell them to lots of different people? At least a few, and realistically most, of the websites that are selling these things don't check too carefully that they actually have the right to sell this art because, well, why would they? Asking those sorts of questions can only decrease your revenue. Worst case scenario, somebody complains that their art's been sold without their permission and the website can say, well, it's on the blockchain now, isn't it? There's nothing we can do about it. Besides, we didn't technically sell your art. We sold an NFT with a hash of your art. That's dubiously legal. You should feel flattered. Now, obviously, it isn't all tiny websites selling gifs they found on Twitter for a couple of $100. Sometimes it's Christie's selling a Beeple for $69 million. And in that case, you know it's legit, because once you've announced something so publicly, you can't put the cat back in the bag. Which is, weirdly, exactly how blockchain works. And I just want to say that a lot of people have said it's very validating for cryptocurrencies that Christie's are accepting payment in Ether for this work. But actually, Beeple is accepting Ether. Christie's want their cut in good old-fashioned dollars, thank you very much. But a big public announcement only works if you're already a pretty well-known artist. If you're not, then anyone can claim to have made your work, and there's not really anything you can do about it. Suddenly the blockchain doesn't seem to be proving very much, and everything is running on the same nebulous trust as regular property deals. And while that's kinda fine, the whole point of blockchains is supposed to be that you won't have to trust anybody. Whereas a physical painting might fetch you a few bucks just because it's pretty, it's hard to imagine anybody buying an NFT on that basis. If the artist isn't at least a bit known, it's kinda hard to see where the value comes from. And don't get me wrong, Beeple's great, but I doubt that he'd say his art is 700,000 times better than people whose NFTs sell for $100 tops. And the art world is poorer for sidelining those artists.
I think the great fight is that the art world, the established art world, it's fundamental to keep an established art world, that the mystery is kept in place, because once it falls into the hands of a proletariat, that the ability to make art is in fact inherent with all of us. It demolishes the idea of art for commerce, and that's no good for business. And so I think that there's always a great coming together of a commerce establishment, which the art world is basically a commerce establishment, to protect its own. I mean, the perfect example is that there were many signers or graffiti artists working in the late 70s and in the early 80s. Why should it be that only 2 or 3 of them should be taken from the sea of signers that were working in New York, some of them incredibly talented guys, and then elevated to a point that there was something particularly special about those 3 guys? It behoves the art establishment to elevate them to a higher plateau as fast as possible, to make them unavailable aesthetically to a low art market. And it does that continually. It extends its parameters quite widely to capture the new thing.
Because that does
and elevate it from low art to high art, successfully enough to increase the commerce proposition that goes along with it.
in order to enhance the value of the painting.
Absolutely.
For all concerned, for the dealers,
and
for
to
everybody.
consign the idea of art to a particular world.
Although lesser-known artists do have one advantage in the digital space, which is precisely that their works are fungible. By which I mean that if somebody said they'd sold 1 million downloads of their digital painting, you wouldn't ask which downloads. They're all identical, that's the point. A physical painting can be sold once, but a digital painting can be sold again and again, and therefore cheaper, and therefore to people who wouldn't otherwise buy art. And it works really well. That's why nobody ever released one copy of an album and sold it for $2 million. I mean, except the Wu-Tang Clan. But okay, say I'm a medium name artist. I'm big enough that nobody can reasonably impersonate me, but I'm small enough that I can't sell my work for 8 figures at Christie's, because, I mean, then do you really need a blockchain to tell you what happened? Say that's where I am, I can sell you my drawing on the blockchain and everyone will know that you are the real owner. What does that mean? Now, there's a lot of philosophy about what ownership means, which we're not going to get into because I'm not Abigail Thorne, and also because we live in a society where one particular interpretation of ownership is backed by men with guns, so we might as well just go with that one. In this sense, ownership is the right to control something. So if I buy the physical Mona Lisa, it's my private property and I can do what I want with it. I get to choose when and how and if it's exhibited in public. Or I could choose to draw a moustache and glasses on it and set it on fire. Now you can argue, I think correctly, that I shouldn't do that and I shouldn't be allowed to do that, but under our current concept of ownership, I can if I want. So what control does the NFT give you over my drawing? And in practical terms, the answer is none. You can't even sell prints of it because I sold you an NFT. I did not sell you the copyright. Now, a straightforward way around this might be to say that I am the artist. I have literal authority over the artwork, and I say that the work of art is the drawing and the NFT. They come as a pair. If you just have one, it's not really the art. So then, if you control the NFT, you control the artwork. And while other people can look at the drawing, they don't have the art. And this doesn't really convince me, because I don't think an artwork is something that an artist tells you is an artwork. I think an artwork is something that you experience as an artwork. For example, David Hensel once created a sculpture and submitted it into an art competition. But judges didn't like it for some reason. It was their prerogative, perfectly fine, and it wasn't accepted. But somewhere along the line it was separated from the plinth that it was entered on. The plinth was judged as a separate entry and was accepted. The judges saw something in it that spoke to them, and it was on display in a gallery while the sculpture was in the basement waiting for Hensel to come and collect it. If a panel of professional art judges believe something to be art, even if the artist didn't, why shouldn't it be art? Or take the pair of students who spotted an empty stand in a gallery once and put a pineapple on it. They came back to the gallery 4 days later, and not only was the pineapple still there, a glass case had appeared around it. Is the pineapple art? Is the pineapple's position in the gallery art? It wasn't meant to be, but people liked it. I think most people would agree that whatever the artist might have wished, the art is just whatever part of a work speaks to people, and that's unlikely to be a string of numbers on a blockchain. Another answer I'm seeing a lot is that NFTs are less analogous to buying a physical painting than they are to buying a signed copy of some mass-produced artwork. But I'm not really buying that either. Let's be real, Christie's do not sell signed posters for $69 million, and nobody is buying a signed printout of a tweet for £1.8 million. If this were just selling signed copies, then people could sign a second copy of Everyday's and sell that as well. And I think we all know that if he did that, the original buyer would sue, because you can't sell something as art ownership, but later decide it's actually art memorabilia. Now, I don't believe NFTs are any of these things. They're not classical ownership, and they're not signed copies either. They're something entirely new. So, let's suppose that art collectors aren't in it for control. They're in it for prestige and the art. And if they all agree that the owner of an artwork is whoever the blockchain says it is, then that should be enough, right? Well, maybe. Because as much as writing a spec and generating a key pair can disrupt the art world, it doesn't answer any of those niggling questions that come up the moment you try to apply something like this to the vagaries of real life. Suppose I sell you an NFT of my drawing, but then the art establishment decides that actually NFTs are terrible for the environment and don't make any sense as a means of art ownership. And they move on to saying, well, if you want to own a digital work, just press it onto a CD, put it in a nice frame, certificate of authenticity, sell that physical object in lieu of a digital token. Do you still own my drawing? If you don't, do I have to refund you because I didn't sell it to you at all? Or do I get to keep the money because I did exactly what I said I would do and it's hardly my fault that your investment went bad? If I refund you, do you have to find somebody who can be bothered mining a dead blockchain until you can give me the token back? And can I now sell you a framed CD of my art in the same way that Disney will sell you a Blu-ray of a film you already own on DVD? You never gave the drawing back, but at some point the definition of ownership changed from what you were doing to what I was doing. So at least arguably the picture is now mine again to sell as I please. Or suppose the art establishment were to split into two factions, and one of them trusted the blockchain and the other wanted certificates of authenticity. Can I sell the same drawing to one buyer from each group? Both of them would own the drawing by their own personal definition of ownership, and it's hardly my problem that those definitions are mutually exclusive. Who am I to take sides on what the correct way to own digital art is? If they want to bet against each other's definitions catching on, why should I stand in their way? But at the same time, selling the same thing twice feels at least a bit dodge. Or suppose, and this actually has started to happen, that you buy my drawing on the blockchain, but then a hacker breaks into your computer and transfers it to their blockchain wallet thing. Now, I think the hacker would be guilty of, well, hacking, and they'd be liable for the price of the drawing in actual damages if you sued them. But if they stole a physical painting, then the police would take it off them and give it back to you, and they can't do that with an NFT. Now, to be sure, I could just mint you a new NFT of the drawing and we could all agree from now on that one is the artwork and the old one is worthless. Just like Gustav Metzger managed to replace the bag of garbage that formed an integral part of his gallery installation almost suspiciously quickly after a well-meaning cleaner quite reasonably threw away the original. But if I have the power to replace a token that's already on the blockchain, then the whole system descends into anarchy. If we can pick and choose which bits of the blockchain we listen to, we might as well start working on the Sabbath and wearing two fabrics at the same time. And maybe you could get a court order of some kind to compel the hacker to return the token to you. But arguably you shouldn't be allowed, because if the blockchain defines ownership, then the hacker owns it now. I don't think many people would accept that if somebody hacks into your account and steals something from you, then it is now theirs, in the same sense that it was yours before. But in order to make that work, we have to figure out in what sense you own my drawing if I own the copyright and a hacker controls the NFT. And I'm not saying these questions haven't got answers, but I am saying they might not have answers, and it's not clear what the answers are. We've invented a brand new system of ownership here that doesn't really map onto anything we've ever done before, and as usual we've just gone hell for leather on trying to see if it'll catch on before we've worked out what it is, or even if it is anything at all. If I spend $69 million on a physical artwork, I might lose my money if it turns out to be a forgery or if people just stop thinking it's good. But I won't lose my money because the sense in which I owned it stops being real. I mean, one day we might reform or abolish the concept of ownership, but that's going to happen a lot sooner for anything on a blockchain than it is for the concept of ownership which is backed by men with guns. And most concepts are a little bit woolly around the edges, and that's fine. But to me, selling these tokens without working out at least a few of these answers kinda feels like selling a plot of land on the moon. I'm sure a guy will write down in his document that you own this particular bit of moon. But one day, when humankind actually goes and settles on the moon, the men with lasers will not be looking at that document to figure out who to kick off your land. And given that selling even the most mediocre artwork on the blockchain can use as much electricity as the average person gets through in an entire month, I kind of feel like the responsible thing to do would have been to work out whether or not selling digital art on the blockchain was even a meaningful concept before we started doing it.